starting with?
Jonathan Havens. I'm a food and drug attorney. I head up the cannabis law practice at Saul, Ewing, Arnstein, and Lear. We're a 400-person, 16-office firm around the country. Been practicing in the space for quite a bit of time. Before private practice, I was a regulatory attorney at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm Neil Butterfield. I'm the owner and founder of a company called Mineral Life Nutraceuticals here in Colorado Springs. I am a nutraceutical company, so we manufacture vitamins, minerals, but now we're also in the CBD space. Operating there, we are an FDA audited facility, and I'm a brand company that started in a basement about just short of 15 years ago, so I really have a pretty broad understanding of what it takes to bootstrap a company from a concept to a full manufacturing facility that I have right now. So that's me.
Good afternoon. My name is Tui Vu, and I am the Director of Operations and Regulatory Affairs for Hammer Enterprises. We are a vertically integrated industrial hemp company located here in Colorado, and we specialize in custom white label products as well as being a raw ingredients manufacturer. Prior to my stint in hemp, I worked in the marijuana space for a few years, and prior to that, I was the lead foodborne illness and outbreak investigator for the city and county of Denver, as well as the first marijuana investigator for the city and county of Denver. And based on my experience, I work very closely with regulators at the local, state, and federal level by partnering up with them, training them, and educating them to ensure fair regulations for the industry.
Hi everyone, my name is Dylan Shea. I am the legal team manager for Canaregs, and we are a legal tech database that focuses on the laws at the state, local, and federal level across the country. We've been following hemp since the 2018 Farm Bill has become a thing, and we've just been noticing lots of different trends and different laws and variations across the country, and excited to share the information with you all today.
Okay, welcome. So the first question we have for you is, who is the man, and what authority do they have over the companies you work with?
So yeah, I'll start. So as we were just talking in a few minutes before our panel, a lot of people like to focus on federal regulators, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Drug Enforcement Administration, the alphabet soup of Washington. But really, where the rubber meets the road for many of you in this room, as you might already know, are state and local regulators. And I'm not at all suggesting that FDA, DEA, and USDA should not be top of mind for you. They should be. But let's just say you're a packaged CBD company selling at retail. Lately, unless you're making therapeutic claims, along the lines of this product treats cancer, AIDS, diabetes, those sorts of things, and you might laugh and say, who would do that? The answer is some people who have received warning letters from FDA. State and local health inspectors, departments of agriculture are going to regulate things like what you're saying on your labeling, where you are manufacturing your product, where you're sourcing your hemp. So the man, quote unquote, can be any and every regulator. And then, of course, state and local law enforcement, who are giving a lot of you headaches these days because they don't know the difference between hemp and, although it's a pejorative term, marijuana, and what the difference between oil from hemp and oil from traditional marijuana plant would be.
Yeah, I think I would echo the same. Of course, I'm on the manufacturing side, so for me, the FDA still plays a pivotal role in that, although they don't have an official rule right now. For me, they're a really weighty organization, but also the local and state guys, like the state of Colorado, is an important entity to be aware of and to understand what their rules and regulations are, because they might be different from a federal level. And they are obviously trying to regulate on a state level. So that's very important, and aligning with them from a manufacturing standpoint and understanding what their rules and regulations and requirements are is an important aspect if you're getting into the manufacturing side of things. Because again, the FDA doesn't have a rule right now to govern a good manufacturing practice standards for the manufacture of CBD at this point. I think that's going to happen, but right now there isn't any, so we really got to look to a state level and just be, apply best practices to your manufacturing and try and be preemptive in terms of what the rulings might be that are coming down the pipeline. But I guess to echo my colleague over here on my left, it would be to say the same thing. It's a number of three-digit people that are what you're going to be having to be aware of, FDA, state, and local, of course, because they're going to have the most impact. And also the state guys are more inclined to visit your facility because they're really trying to, on a state level, trying to get a hold of the industry and create some standard.
In addition to everything that everybody to my left had indicated, I would also say that the FTC is also another body that you should be aware of, because any sort of fraudulent claims, mislabeling, misbranding, the FTC will be involved in that. In addition to state and local law enforcement, you should also be aware of other local regulatory agencies, including the fire department, the building department, excise and license, neighborhood inspections, hazardous waste. There's a myriad of agencies that will have regulatory authority over your operation, very specific to the type of processes that you have in your operation. So please don't neglect any agency because it doesn't specifically deal with food and or manufacturing, because it is really, a whole look at your entire operation.
Yeah, and just to echo what everyone's saying, hemp and cannabis is one of the really unique fields because it touches every single aspect. It touches real estate, it touches waste disposal, it touches environmental issues. So there's a whole panoply of different agencies and rules and regulations you have to pay attention to. And it really also comes down to local a lot of times. For cannabis, the biggest impediment to any business, besides the fear of the federal government, is the local jurisdictions. They have a lot of control over the application process. They can impose fees, they can impose taxes. There's a whole slew of different procedures they can put into place, which is what's nice about hemp and CBD, is that you have a lot less of that, but it's still there. And when it comes down to a lot of these things, like I live in Boulder, Colorado. Every restaurant I walk into, you can get like a $5 CBD shot if you want. Technically, that's not allowed under federal law. And really, it's up to the local and state jurisdictions to implement procedures against that. But in a lot of places, you're not going to see that because local jurisdictions either don't care or don't really see the issue with it. On the other hand, the New York State Department of Health, starting this month, is imposing fines up to $600 and strikes on their licenses for any restaurant or bar that offers any CBD food or drinks or anything at all. So it really comes down to knowing what your local area that you're located in says about these issues. And even then, who knows what's going to happen. There are states that have bills that say, hey, you can add CBD to any food products, but, the FDA hasn't responded to that, and I'm sure they won't be pleased with that. So the man really depends on where you're at in the chain of business. But, really, the federal government's always the boogeyman, but it's the local government that really is going to hit you for things if you violate any of these laws or any of these practices.
Yeah. If I can just add to that, one other agency that I did not include that you should all be aware of if you are a processor and or extractor is the EPA. If you are handling any sort of hazardous materials, you are required to properly dispose of your hazardous materials. So that's something that you should be aware of. And then regarding the state and local perspective, just so that everyone is aware, in the event that you aren't aware of this, in Colorado, hemp is regulated as a food ingredient, and that is why retail facilities, retail restaurants are allowed to add it into their beverages and their foods. So that is as long as you're getting it from an approved source, whereas in New York, it's regulated as a dietary supplement. And so if it's regulated as a dietary supplement, you should not be using conventional food as your carrier. So just be very aware of that.
One thing, we've all been talking about government agencies, and that's what this panel is about, but I like to say to my clients, in the absence of government agencies enforcing requirements, plaintiffs' attorneys will enforce the requirements. And when I say requirements, that doesn't mean regulatory requirements. But if you say that your product does something and someone takes you to court, the reasonable consumer standard is going to take over. So, let's say you have 30 milligrams of CBD per serving in your product and you're charging a premium for it. And you're saying it's going to do a whole host of things, and you say it's organic, and you say a bunch of different claims. The reasonable consumer standard could be enforced against you, and if you don't know why you're saying something, just imagine you're having to defend that to a judge or a jury. And so in the absence of solidified regulations in harmony at the state and federal level, which is exactly what we're dealing with now, a patchwork of approaches, as Tui was mentioning, between New York and Colorado and all the other, 48 states. You need to know what a reasonable consumer would expect from your product. And the other thing is, regulatory agencies take very seriously complaints lodged by competitors in the marketplace. So, if you think a competitor is going to see something that you're doing and be upset about it and take it to the federal government or a state government or local government, think about that. I'm not suggesting you don't be competitive, but I am suggesting that if your marketing folks are saying, well, this is really going to piss off, Joe down the street, well, that's fine if you piss Joe off, but can you defend what you're saying is a very important thing to think about.
Something that I noticed when I was a previous regulator was when I was in the marijuana space, a lot of times the industry stuck together and they weren't willing to divulge issues, food safety concerns, voluntary recalls by the company to regulators because they didn't want to impact the industry. And they weren't looking at the consumer or the public health significance of what they were actually doing. Something that I'm hoping that the industry does is that we all come together and lift each other up and elevate the industry by, I'm not trying to say, call people out on anything that they're doing, but we really have to have a higher standard for everybody in the industry, not only ourselves, but also our competitors.
So I think we learned from that we should call it the min and not the man. So the next question I have is, we've heard a lot over the last 2 days about claims and how you're going to get in trouble if you can't substantiate your claims. So besides claims, what are some of the things in cultivation or in manufacturing that the men will come after you for?
THC content. We in the hemp space understand that anything above 0.3% by dry weight THC, that's a controlled substance, right? And if you ask upstream, downstream folks for documentation and they don't give it to you, don't do business with those people. There are plenty of players in the space who are very tight from a documentation perspective, who can tell you everything from soil to oil about that product, about where it came from, about where it was cultivated. There's just no reason to do business with people who will not tell you everything about their products. I mean, heavy metals, pesticides, all the rest, the things that you're testing for, fine and agreed, and having presence of things that you shouldn't have could lead to a recall. But I think THC content for me is a very big one. The other is, were you manufacturing a facility that wasn't registered that needed to be registered? So your standard purchase orders with the standard terms and conditions on the back, I'm personally not in favor of. You want to make sure your supply agreements call out all these issues and more that I'm talking about. But from a controlled substances perspective, from a what's going to land you in jail versus what's going to get you a cease and desist letter, it's THC content. The other thing is content of CBD, right? If you say you have 30 milligrams per serving and you have 0, huge problem. Tui was mentioning the Federal Trade Commission. If you're selling your products, I've been saying this for a long time, if you're selling your products at a premium as compared to your competitors and you're claiming that your product is better, 2 words for you: unjust enrichment. Someone's going to come after you and say, I gave you $100 for 2 ounces of a product that did nothing, that has nothing in it. So, those are some of the big things that I'm focusing on and that I'm trying to help clients with right now.
Yeah, for me, from a manufacturing perspective, THC, of course, is an important component. But I guess it's a really weighted question because I could talk on this for hours, just this aspect in itself. But if I were going to sum it up, I would be considering these 3 things would be identity, purity, and strength. As a manufacturer, we have to be very concerned about those things. We have to be able to identify that the ingredient we're adding there, the CBD oil is in fact CBD. We want to understand the purity of that product, which includes the gambit of testings, heavy metals, micros, pesticides, residual solvents, the full CBD panel. We want to understand that. We want to understand the strength, so that, and that comes down to the label claim, right? So if you're saying it's 30 milligrams per serving, it's got to be 30 milligrams per serving, and we should be able to verify that. For me as a manufacturer, I only work with vendors when purchase oils, because I'm not on the extraction side, so I take the distillate and use the distillate and to produce a finished product. I'm really concerned with those things: identity, purity, and strength. We're testing all of our raw materials as they arrive. We have in-process tests, and when they do arrive, we're actually comparing those to a standard or a specification that we've established for that product. So we verify against that specification. We then blend with that product. We have in-process testing during that manufacturing phase. But then in addition to that, I'm actually finished goods testing too. So when the product's packaged in its final retail package, we're pulling samples at that point as well, and we're testing for label claim, and we're testing again for micro. And that's just to verify that my process didn't bring anything into that product that wasn't originally there. So again, and there's a lot of ways to achieve that, right? So I mean, every process that we have is a validated process. So every cleaning process we have for our tanks, for our instruments, is all validated. We also have manufacturing master batch records that contain every bit of information. So because traceability is going to be a very big thing here. You want to be able to trace where your raw materials come from, but not only your raw materials, your components as well, because you could have a batch of contaminated bottles that introduce a contaminant into that finished goods, and you're going to need to be able to trace that back to the original purchase order and the manufacturer's lot number. So it's a really involved process, but again, to sum it up, it's going to be the identity, purity, and strength to be able to make sure that that is done with integrity, and it is what you claim it to be, and it's free of contaminants. I think is a major issue. From an FDA perspective, I believe that's what they're most concerned about here, right? Because their original purpose and their existence is to ensure public safety, and they really care about that. They want to make sure that we're not selling a product that is contaminated or adulterated in any way, but that it is what we say it is, and it has the amount of ingredient in there that we claim is in there. So that's my focus as a manufacturer.
So I can speak on a couple of different levels. From the cultivation standpoint, something that obviously we're concerned about is the soil that we grow in. If you grow outdoors, then there's a possibility that there may be heavy metals or any other residual pesticides that are in the soil. So that's something that we would be concerned with from the cultivation standpoint. From the processing after harvest might potentially be mold and mycotoxins and other microbes, because if there's improper drying of the material, then what are you doing? You're introducing an unwholesome product into the extraction and extracting that and concentrating that. From the processing standpoint, using food-grade solvents is very important, because if any of you attended my keynote, I very briefly touched upon making sure that you're using food-grade ingredients, food-grade solvents in the processing and manufacturing of these products, because it is for human consumption. In addition to processing, residual solvents, what is the acceptable level of residual solvents? From the manufacturing standpoint, I agree with everything that you indicated. I think that traceability is key, and also understanding your process and having the proper critical control points in your manufacturing process where it makes sense for you to test at a certain point, because a test means nothing if you aren't doing it at the right point of the process, correct? So if I'm trying to test for microbial, but I'm not looking at it as for my raw ingredient that I'm selling for bulk, or I'm not testing the microbial for the finished product that I'm introducing into commerce, but I'm only doing it maybe in the beginning and not at the end, then how is that going to affect the finished product that I'm sending out? So understanding your process, understanding the process control, understanding the hazards of your entire process. So any of you that are in food manufacturing understand kind of what I'm saying is HACCP, right? Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. This is nothing new. Our industry is not new. What we're doing is we are manufacturing commodities that will be consumed by humans, and we have to ensure that it is wholesome, that it is unadulterated, that we're not introducing any sort of products that may harm, the public, the general public. As far as manufacturing from the labeling standpoint, or if you're a brand owner, so let's just say that you don't make your own product, you should find manufacturers that are able to foresee any sort of regulations that may be adopted by either different regulatory agencies, or hopefully the company that you're working with is adopting those standards and being very proactive about it. I would be very weary about anybody who would be making claims, whether they be structure function claims, which you can only do for dietary supplements, any sort of drug claims, or health benefit claims, which would be associated with drugs, right? So if you're regulated as a food, as we are in Colorado, we're not going to make any sort of dietary supplement claims or health benefit claims or anything like that, because we're a food. With that being said, you should ensure that your nutrition facts panel, if that's what you're putting on your label, is accurate. Your ingredients list is accurate in descending order, not having any sort of intervening information in your ingredients list, making sure that your font size is accurate. Understanding that a part of your label is your social media platforms, as well as your website. That is an extension of your label. A lot of people don't understand that, which also means no testimonials that say, this cured my cancer. Just fully understanding what it is that you're producing and what sort of regulations you need to adopt.
I really don't have too much to add to that. Everyone else pretty much covered that really well. But be sure to follow procedures, and definitely going back to what you post on your website. Curaleaf, like a really large medical cannabis and CBD company, in July had the FDA send them a warning letter, and they cited every single instance where they mentioned a health claim or testimony on their website. The day after, they scrubbed everything. So if you really want to avoid the ire of the FDA, don't put anything public out like that. But I think everyone else covered those points better than I could.
If I could just add to what's already been said, would be if you have a consumer-facing product, and so you have a brand that somebody's manufacturing, is really know your manufacturer. Do not take what they say as a truth. I recommend that you institute some sort of quality or vendor approval program. So if you have a manufacturer, I would do site visits if at all possible. Make sure they have written standard operating procedures in terms of their manufacturing, and ask them, just inquire, right? So do not just take their C of A's and what they say as gospel truth. Verify, because what I've discovered out there's a lot of well-meaning individuals who talk all about quality and how quality orientated their product or brand is, or their manufacturing process is, but they really don't have a clue in terms of what it takes to achieve good manufacturing practice and just how involved that process is. I mean, this is something that I discovered through the hardships and through attending what I call the University of Hard Knocks. And I just learned as I went along. But it's been a 15-year learning process. It's not something that I would recommend you folks get involved in unless you have 15 years to spare. But it's just to understand that many people are well-meaning and they try and produce products, but they may not have all the pieces of the puzzle that constitutes good manufacturing practice and processes. So know your vendor. Definitely visit them if at all possible.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of folks come to us and say, well, here's what I want to say, here are the kind of products I want to sell. And I say, well, why are you saying that? Well, because my competitor is saying that. And my response to that normally is, unless your competitor's attorney is going to defend you in court, I would recommend that you have a reason for saying whatever it is you're saying. So, I think a couple of the themes that to me are very important are multi-layer testing. So testing at the source, testing at the manufacturing level, testing at the finished product level, and then having a reason to say whatever it is you're going to say. The terms organic and gluten-free and vegan and kosher and, no THC. If you're making drug testing claims and you do a unqualified, you will not fail a drug test if you take this product, people metabolize CBD differently. And just because you think 0.3% THC or less is a low amount of THC, that's by volume, right? That's by, that's not a milligram amount, that's a percentage. So how much of the product are we talking about? How big is the product? How many milligrams does it have? If someone fails a drug test and you told them they weren't going to fail a drug test, I have a hard time believing you're going to be successful in that lawsuit. So claims matter, what you say matters, what you're manufacturing matters, and just because the floodgates have opened and we don't think regulators are going to put the genie back in the bottle doesn't mean they won't call out bad actors. And the bigger and bigger you get, the bigger the target is on your backs, both from a competitor's attention perspective and from a regulator's perspective.
I think what I might add would be, yes, definitely know your supplier, know your manufacturer, understand that everything should be derived from an approved source, whether it be an ingredient. One thing that I do want to highlight is all of this, again, is outlined, for FDA's FSMA, which is Food Safety Modernization Act. Again, you can adopt those standards. It doesn't need to be specific to the cannabis industry. It is based on how you are manufacturing and what product that you are introducing into commerce. The other thing that I failed to mention from the last question that I wanted to bring around, or at least have everybody understand, is what about OSHA? What about your employees, right? You have to ensure that all of your employees are operating safely. So it's not just a matter of products that you're producing, but it's a matter of are you ensuring the employee health, while they're manufacturing these products. So something else that you need to consider as well.
Very good. I was also going to mention, and you had brought it up, 21 CFR 117, the Food Safety Modernization Act. If you are considered a food producer, you must be compliant. The dates are gone. Small company dates have passed. You have to be compliant, and that means you have a PCQI, a Preventive Controls Qualified Individual, on staff, and you're doing all the things that subpart A through G tells you to do. So you really need to become aware of what the requirements of FSMA are to be compliant in the food space. Okay. So my last question before we take questions is, there are a lot of new people that are at this conference that are just getting into it or exploring or just put out their first product. From your experience, what can you give them as sage advice to help them be successful?
I think it's a lot of what we've talked about. We've circled around it, but let's put some bullet points behind it so there's some kind of healthy takeaways for folks. Number one, have a reason. Whether that's have a reason to get into the space, having a reason to say what you're saying. Selling like hotcakes is not usually a good enough reason to do this, because at the end of the day, when you're spending 15, 18, 20 hours a day vetting your suppliers, manufacturing your product, working with suppliers, working with advertisers, you're going to need to know what you're doing and having a purpose to do it. Again, you working with reputable partners, making sure you know where your hemp is coming from and that the person who cultivated it has a license from the state to get it, to cultivate it. Knowing that the winds shift every single day and being okay with that. My personal philosophy is if a client receives a communication from a regulator, I don't just shift and go somewhere else. I go right to that regulator. I have that conversation. I think a lot of folks are scared of receiving those letters. Frankly, I think it's a good thing because it can be an opportunity to engage and tell your good story, if you have a good story, to say, look, we're SQF certified and we know what FSMA is and we know that our cultivators and our processors are licensed by the OLCC in Oregon. Whatever it is, stand behind your documentation, but to be able to stand behind all of that, you need to have that documentation. You need to have answers to those tough questions that you're asking to your partners. And so, again, I would just tell you, have your own reason for doing whatever it is you're doing, and have compliance be your badge of honor, not, the scarlet letter, so to speak. Making compliance, I know it's not a sexy topic, and it's not something that you want to spend your money on right out of the gate, but in this space where there's going to be a lot of consolidation over the next couple of years, yes, there's a lot of money to be made, but smaller players who don't care about compliance will not be here in the next 2 years, let alone the next year. So make compliance and regulatory be your banner, not your downfall.
Yeah, I think there's many entry points into this industry. So from the grow side all the way to a branded product. So it's difficult to speak to all of it, but I think what's really important is this is an exciting opportunity. This is a great industry. We're definitely growing. There's no doubt about it. Everybody here understands that. I think my takeaway would be for you guys would be know your industry, know whichever section or lane that you're playing in, really learn everything that you can about that. Understand that it is a dynamic industry right now. Everything's changing and shifting. But I'll echo what I said earlier. Understand and know your suppliers. Don't take their word for it. Visit them. Understand compliance. There is no FDA rule now over the manufacturing of these products, but there are rules out there that are very similar to what we're doing. This is not new, which we've already spoken about, which is the FSMA and the CFR 21-117, which is food, and also 111, which is dietary supplements. There's resources out there to understand what it takes to put a quality product out there, and just be a student of this industry and learn as much as you can, because it's the ones that are better educated, the guys that have armed themselves and equipped themselves and understand compliance are the ones that are going to stick it out. It's all the other brands, like you mentioned next to me here, are the ones that are going to fail and flounder, and those are the ones that are going to get nailed. And it's very, very hard to recover from one of those, from an audit, from an FDA auditor, or any of those types of things. It's really difficult to recover. It's bad for business to be branded as a company that has had warning letters against them. So just understand the industry. I don't think it's very different from the dietary supplement and the food, especially with regards to claims. Just understand what's going on and keep abreast of it. There's a lot of resources out there that can help educate you as this whole industry grows and develops.
I would say definitely transparency. And I say that because the more transparent you are in your operation with either your customer base or your clients, the easier it is to ensure that you are following the rules that are set forth, right? Because if you are doing something that is wrong, they will let you know. Whereas if you're hiding it, you'll never know whether or not you're doing things right or wrong. I would also say being able to pivot, because this industry is constantly changing every single day. And then the last thing that I would say, and this is something that, as a former regulator and now currently working in the industry, I would say trust but verify. Like, you can tell me whatever you tell me, but I will verify everything that you say, everything that you do. I want to go and conduct second-party audits of your operation. I want to see the documentation behind all of your ingredients. I want to have testing analyses of the finished products or the raw ingredients that you're bringing forward to me. So you can tell me whatever you want to tell me, but I'm going to verify every single thing that you are saying, because when it comes to the end of it, it's going to be my name, my brand, and I will be the one that's ultimately responsible. Sure, I can go back to my ingredient supplier and say, hey, you sold me some tainted product, but shame on me for not verifying, right? So I would say trust but verify.
Yes, to that point, everyone should be from Missouri, the show me state.
Yeah, kind of just to echo what everyone's saying, know what's going on, know your audience, know your region, know who the man is for you, know if, what procedure you need to do, know if you need to be licensed, know if you need to have a registration, know your laws and everything around it, because knowledge is power, to quote Schoolhouse Rock. But, if you don't have that, you don't really have a reason to be in this. And another thing is desire. Know you want to do this. Like, hemp and CBD are the new kale, basically. Everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to have it. But, just because you can do it, and because there is a lower barrier to entry for hemp and CBD than cannabis, doesn't mean you necessarily should. I have friends that have gotten into it and grew some horrible hemp plants and made some horrible products and they had to get rid of it and they lost money. So know that you want to do it, know that you can do it, and just be careful. It's still brand new and it's still burgeoning and people are starting to know about it, the general public knows about it, but one wrong misstep can really spell a bad image for the industry. So if you're going to do this, follow what's been said here. Be compliant, wear that as a badge of honor, know your market, test, be transparent with everything, because if you're not, it just takes one bad actor to really bring about a negative PR storm and a negative public perception that could really end what people have been working for decades on to get to this point, and which can really help a lot of people. So know what's going on and don't mess it up.
I think if I can just add to that, I would say also be willing to know that you don't know everything and reach out to those who do know, and hopefully whether it be another company that is willing to mentor you, or whether it be a regulatory agency that is willing to assist you understand the regulations, because there are a lot of regulations that would apply to the industry where you may not know, and you may not have someone in-house that is your subject matter expert. If you're unable to have a compliance team or a compliance person, and you're the person that wears all of the hats, don't be afraid to reach out to regulators. I would love it whenever any of my operators would call me and ask, I'm thinking of doing this, but I don't fully understand what that may entail in terms of regulations. Can you please assist me? Instead of me coming in, seeing what they're doing and saying, you know what, cease and desist, I'm disposing of all of this, we're going to embargo all of this product, and potentially you might have a recall. So reach out to your regulatory bodies and see how they can assist you.
The one thing I was going to say is, the notion that there aren't rules from the FDA's perspective that Neil mentioned, I would agree. However, it's important to understand the flip side of that coin, which is the FDA, their view of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is you shouldn't be putting CBD in supplements in food at all. So while there aren't rules for what you should do, just understand if you are operating in this space, and by the way, I represent a bunch of CBD companies that are selling supplements. So there's an understanding that, yes, the FDA thinks you shouldn't do this, but as I mentioned earlier, they're not enforcing generally unless you're making therapeutic claims. But to Tui's point, to Neil's point, if you're going to get in this industry, you need to know what the rules of the road are, what you're getting into. It's okay that FDA doesn't think that supplements and foods are allowed with CBD in there. That doesn't mean that you should or shouldn't sell them, but you need to understand that that's the position, and that you need to operate your business knowing that, okay, we know the FDA, if they came in here knowing what we're doing, they're not going to be thrilled about it, but the current enforcement posture is what I said it was a moment ago. But don't just say, well, we want FDA to clarify its position because we think this is, we think they're going the wrong direction. No, you want them to change their position. They've already stated exactly what their position is. So it's understanding the nuance and knowing what you're getting into versus assuming what someone told you at a conference, to be true. Everything that everybody said up here, I would say most of it's grounded in fact, some of it's opinion, but it's trust but verify. You can't just take someone else's word for it, because at the end of the day, if you're on the receiving end of an enforcement action, unless those people are hired to defend you, you're going to be defending yourself, or you're going to have to hire somebody else. So that's an important thing to understand.
So open the floor to questions. I saw you first.
Did you guys hear the first part?
Yeah.
Yeah. So topicals versus tinctures and routes of administration, and are the different products within? I mean, I have a product line, and of course, there's all kinds of different things in everybody's product lines. Are those regulated differently? Like when you're doing your labeling, for instance, and a tincture should probably be under Food and Drug Administration, right? Same as supplements or something you ingest. If we are going along the lines of cosmetics or cosmeceuticals, is the labeling supposed to be different? Are we regulated differently? And then our chosen manufacturers, are they supposed to be, have areas within their plants that are separated, according to the different agencies of regulation? Does that make sense?
Yeah, great question. And it's the first part of the question was topicals versus tinctures versus ingestibles. I mean, tinctures are ingestible, but What I would say is the FDA's position that I talked about with foods and supplements, the way the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act works, just very, very quick, is there's a drug exclusionary rule in the ingestibles format, but not in the topicals format. What that means is the FDA considers CBD to be a drug ingredient because it was studied as a drug and approved as a drug before it was commercially available as a food. The topicals portion or the cosmetics portion of that law does not have that drug exclusionary rule. What does that mean? It means that the FDA doesn't prohibit topical CBD as long as you're not making therapeutic claims, which is why you see big box stores like CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid selling topical CBD products because those are not prohibited under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. From a labeling perspective, absolutely. There are similar requirements like ingredients by descending order of predominance, but there are different ingredients. There are different requirements for cosmetics. There's different requirements for foods. There's different requirements for supplements. The FDA regulates foods and supplements both as foods, but one has a supplement facts panel, the other has a nutrition facts panel. There's rules about structure function claims that Tui was mentioning earlier. So yes, I'm just talking about from the federal perspective. Then states, like Ohio Department of Agriculture has its own rules for CBD products. Louisiana has its own rules for CBD products. New York State has a specific warning that the FDA DSHEA, Dietary Supplement Health Education Act warning, is not sufficient for New York State. So it's unfortunately a patchwork, but from a federal perspective, which I think a lot of the states and localities are taking their cue from, at least as far as I've seen, is yes, there are different requirements. But for those of you in this room who aren't in the space yet, topicals is, as far as I'm concerned, a lower risk way from a federal enforcement perspective, as long as you're not making therapeutic claims, to get in the space. But ingestible products are popular, so at some point you decide, what am I going to do?
So can a manufacturer, in one product line, manufacturers, a 1 versus a 5, or they're all coming off the same, according to DEA, the schedule?
You're talking about scheduling of products?
Correct.
So, I'm not if these are all 0.3% THC or less, the DEA really shouldn't have an issue as long as you're getting it from an approved hemp source and can prove and have documentation and the rest. Manufacturers, you can have a food facility that also manufactures cosmetics and other. I would be a little bit skeptical of someone who says they can do it all because,
Right.
Residue from lines and equipment and our product's going to look similar in format.
So they should have separate, within one facility, that it should be separated. They should have.
Yeah,
good manufacturing
So
I'm gonna
process.
let Neil
I can,
talk about
I can
that.
speak to that a little bit. Yes, you can have a facility that does it all, but it's very compartmentalized and segregated within the manufacturing process. So you cannot use the same line to do, well, you can, provided you've got a process in place that is verified that it's cleaning the line of any residue or overspill from a cosmetic as you switch to an ingestible product. But you can never run two different products, like a cosmetic on line 1 and a dietary supplement on line 2 at the same time, unless they're in completely different rooms and completely different spaces. So there's very, very strict controls in terms of that. So you cannot cross-contaminate, and that you cannot pick. And that all comes down to your standard operating procedures, right? We have fail-safes in place that allow us, when we're pulling ingredients, that we're not going to mix up a topical ingredient with an ingredient that's designated towards an edible. So there's very strict control. So that's normally really where you need to be aware of what your manufacturer is doing and whether or not they have the correct standard operating procedures in place to prevent any cross-contamination. But there are facilities that can do it all. I guess the bigger question there is, are they experts in all these different areas? Often not. I dabble in a lot of different things, but we do it in a segregated sort of fashion.